So there's. Is there a way to mute everybody? Yes. Keep an eye on questions.
Hi guys, sorry, we had quite a few technology difficulties tonight. Okay.
If it makes you feel better, my work has technology difficulties
all the time. And yeah, it's tricky. You gotta transform a clinic real fast from 6 o'clock to 6:30 into a new presentation space. So thank you guys for coming on Zoom. I'm going to try to pay attention. If you guys have questions, feel free to send them in the chat. Jackie's going to try to be checking those periodically. If it takes a minute, I apologize. We're also going to try to get the presentation up for you, so you won't just have to see it on here. You'll be able to see it on your screen as well, hopefully. I think there is a way to do that on the Zoom. But we got people here in person too. And yeah, so I'm Katie. I'm an occupational therapist here at Children's TherAplay and our trauma-informed care specialist as well. And I'm in Indy, and I specialize in pediatrics and trauma-informed care, hippotherapy, vision, and feeding. So I'm a little across the board with lots of things that I work on with kiddos. That's a great thing about being an OT. And I practice both in outpatient and early intervention. So I practice here, and I also see kids 0 to 3. And I myself have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective genetic tissue disorder, which means everything in my body is like super loosey-goosey. And how that relates back in with these big feelings, we're going to talk a little bit more later about sensory things and muscle tone. And kids that have lower muscle tone, like I did when I was a kid, often had a harder time knowing where their body is in space and what's going on externally with body awareness, but also internal body awareness. So knowing when you're getting frustrated or knowing when you're getting hungry until you're to the point where you explode. So I was one of those kids that struggled with a lot of big feelings. So yes, I can relate. But also I know that not all these things that I'm going to be talking to you are going to work for every single child. So I really want you guys are the experts on your children, and I want you to take what you think will work and leave what doesn't, and no hard feelings at all. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to move your body when you need to. We're all about self-regulation here. So if you need to get up, the bathroom's just through the doors. You guys have that, you've been here. You guys have some water, but just do what feels good and what feels right. We're going to be going through some of these things. You can read them. And I want you to first, in the very beginning, to just start thinking about your kid and think about maybe 1 or 2 situations that come up pretty frequently that you're like, okay, if we could get through these specific things. So just kind of keep in mind throughout the presentation, maybe 1 or 2 things or 1 or 2 situations that can't occur at home. And we're going to come back to them kind of at the end. So kind of helps to have a couple things in your mind that we can maybe think, okay, this might work or this wouldn't work as we go along. I want to talk first about the brain states, and this is an area I like to geek out on, so I will try to keep it minimal to the anatomy brain talk today. But the brain states, I feel, are super, super important. So we have our prefrontal cortex over here. So that's the very front part of our brain. And that is where we are focused, we're learning, we're calm, you're able to engage and pay attention when you're in this part of our brain right here. This part of our brain doesn't develop until our mid to late 20s. So our kids aren't always using this part of our brain because it's not developed yet. So lots of redos for kids, because a lot of times they might just do something and they're not even really thinking about it, right? If you're like, whew, let's try that one again, they're going to make a different decision because they weren't thinking with their prefrontal cortex. They were maybe just reacting to whatever that thought that came into their brain was. And then we have our midbrain, which is our fight, flight response when we're sensing danger of any kind. So right when you think there's a tiger coming after you, you go to that fight, flight, we get that cortisol pumping through our body. And this is where we are when we are having a meltdown. So we are no longer up here, and our thinking brain rationally, and our language is up here too. So we're no longer up here, we're in our midbrain, and we're having a stress response. And Then down here is our brainstem, and that's just our survival response. So just our heart rate and our breathing, things that we don't think about that just happen automatically. When we're feeling really, really low, and you can just like major depression, can't do anything, that's you're just in your brainstem type of thing. So when we're talking about meltdowns and big feelings, we're primarily talking about this midbrain and that fight flight response. And I think it really transformed how I think about big feelings and meltdowns when I realized that it's not just a willful, oh man, they're throwing a fit again, but it's truly a brain state change. Like they are no longer up here. They don't have access to language. We are having a stress response. So changing that focus of having a meltdown to, oh, we're having a stress response kind of transformed how I saw a meltdown. And knowing that we don't have access to our words. So no matter how many times I say, well, tell me what happened and tell me why did you do this? They can't tell me that yet when we're over the top flipping out because we're in our midbrain. We don't have access to our words. And we learn our regulation through co-regulation. So our kids don't know how to regulate their own bodies until we teach them. And for typically developing kids, they wouldn't be able to regulate on their own until about 7. So for kids that aren't typically developing, it's going to take a little bit longer too. So expecting that they're going to need a lot of co-regulation, and we're going to teach them this co-regulation, and then they'll be able to regulate. So co-regulation helps teach regulation, and that's so helpful. If you think about like babies when they're first born and they cry and they're upset, we have to teach them, we have to soothe them and tell them they can trust us and we're going to be okay and that kind of thing. Same thing when we start to experience our big feelings too. All right, so a little bit more about the midbrain and what's going on in our midbrain when we're stressed out. So the cortisol is that stress hormone, and I think it's fascinating to know that nearly every stress cell has a cortisol receptors. So not is it just a brain response, but there's cortisol flowing through every cell of your body. So it doesn't just affect your brain, but affects your stomach and your heart and everything. So, you know, I don't know if you've ever had like a near car accident or something that's really scary that happens to you and you have that fight flight response, you feel it throughout your whole body. And our kids, when we're having these big meltdowns, are feeling this stress through their whole body. So cortisol, stress hormone. So then we have our amygdala, which is our smoke detector, and it's constantly scanning our body for threats. So it's kind of like, is everything okay? Is everything okay? Oh, it's not okay. So it's just constantly on alert. And what's fascinating about the amygdala is it's developed by 6 months in utero. So when our baby is still in utero in 6 months, it already has its amygdala developed. So it's realizing that stress response even then. So a lot of times people are like, oh, well, they wouldn't remember something that happened in utero or something when they were 1 or 2, but our amygdala is fully developed. That stress response and knowing this was scary, even if we don't remember it, our body can remember the response that we had, and we can have some of those stressful responses later if we get into a cortisol loop. So the amygdala then will send, if it's like, oh no, something's scary, it sends it to the thalamus, and the thalamus to the pituitary to release that stress hormone. And then we go to the prefrontal cortex. So it's like, is this a scary thing? The amygdala is, it's scary. And the prefrontal cortex is like, no, that's not a monster, that's a tree, you're fine. Or it's like, oh yeah, that's a monster, freak out. So we have that connection from the amygdala, the midbrain, to the prefrontal cortex. But if we have a cortisol loop where it's repeated exposures again and again and again, and this is what we see in traumatic stress situations or kids that experience trauma, or adverse childhood experiences, if we're constantly in that state of stress, then that connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex gets lessened. And so it's harder. So then our kiddos don't have it, and they're not able to ask the prefrontal cortex, was that a monster? They just go to, it's a monster, everything's a monster. So our tolerance of knowing it's kind of scary, oh, I think I'm okay, is lesser and lesser and lesser. So everything becomes more of a bigger stress response. So that's what we see if we have a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and it can impact our attachments, impulse control, our sleep, a lot of things over time. Okay. So we're going to go over 3 different levels of managing big feelings today. And a lot of times we don't need to get to the top level if we really focus on the first 2 levels. So kind of think of it as this pyramid where connecting is at the bottom, and that is our most important. And then we have empowering and then correcting. And we're going to talk about each of these levels. And it's so important that we're making sure we're hitting all of them, but particularly in order. This is modeled by Dr. Karen Purvis, who founded the Trust-Based Relational Intervention. She's her model and program is wonderful. It's through TCU, and she's got a lot of great things, but I really like this model and have learned a lot from it. But sometimes if we're working up here on correction and we've tried all these different things and it's not working, a lot of times we have to go back down and say, okay, we really need to focus more on that connection and that empowering piece. So we're going to break that down into what does that mean? What is connection and what is empowering, and what does correction look like next? So connect before we correct. I tell myself this all the time, especially when I see new kids at the clinic, right? I may have a kiddo that I've never seen before and we might be bouncing off the walls, but unless I have a connection with that child, unless they trust me, the correction isn't going to really matter or stick. So kids get pretty limited choices throughout their whole day. They get told everything, what to do, what to eat, when to go to bed, when to put their clothes on. And I know how it feels when I'm constantly told just to do things. If I just had a boss, my boss is sitting right here. She's a great boss. If she only told me to do things, I don't think that relationship would be great. But she checks in and we have other interactions other than just her telling me to do things all the time. So connection matters with our kids too, right? It's hard because we have places to be and things that need to get done, especially in school starting and everything. And it's so easy to slip into the just this, do this. Have you brushed your teeth? Are you sure you brushed your teeth? We need to where's your shoes? Put on the socks. But I know how it feels when somebody gives me their complete and undivided attention. And our kids really need that. So when we give that connection piece to our kid, it increases that self-regulation. They're able to stay in that prefrontal cortex longer, and it increases that relationship with them. So I really encourage 10 minutes a day of child-led play. So 10 minutes of special mom time or special caregiver time, where the child leads it. We're not putting demands on them, and just, what do you want to do for your special time with mom today? You can set a timer and put your phone down, and it's amazing how many parents have told me, okay, we did the 10 minutes a day thing, and like, we're not seeing the same amount of meltdowns anymore. Like, I don't know what it was. I'm like, it's that connection piece. The other thing is if we're having big changes in routines, I have some kiddos that have a house at mom and a house at dad's. And so they have a change in schedule pretty frequently. And one thing that one of my families does is when we come back to mom's house, we always have a dance party first. And I love that. I think it's so great because before we get back into our do this, they have a connection time where they just dance for 2 or 3 songs, and then they can get back into some of those things. But they're dancing, they've got some safe touch going on, they're moving their bodies, using both sides of their brain, and then they can move back into things. So just having, whether it's dance, whether it's playing a game together, if you're having big routines, especially, school starting, oh man, I feel like a lot of big feelings come out when school starts because we're trying to hold everything together. But if you have big changes, just try something that's a connection point with your kiddos. Another way of connection that's really important is affirmations and encouragement. And I really try to encourage effort-based over skill-based encouragement and affirmation. When we encourage the effort of, wow, it looks like you tried really hard on that coloring page, rather than, oh, you're so good at coloring. I'm telling them that I'm praising something that they can have control over. Like, I can control how hard I try, rather than, oh, they like me because I'm good at this.
Okay, come on. I would be probably not for tomorrow.
Don't worry about it.
So I always want to encourage that effort-based over skill-based motivation and encouragement. And same thing with like internal encouragement versus external. Like, it's nice to be pretty, but you worked really hard. I can see you didn't give up, even though that was tricky. That means something. a little bit more. I love to say you must feel so proud of yourself to my kids. I used to say, oh, I'm so proud of you. But I realized I want them to be proud of themselves because that's something that they're always going to be with themselves, no matter what. Like I might not be always there, but I want them to be internally motivated by themselves and also to be proud of themselves when they do work really hard. So I've started saying, oh, you must be so proud of yourself. And then I also say, but I believe in you. Like I want, it's not a bad thing to be proud of your kids. You should be proud of your kids and they should know that, but it's also good for them to be proud of themselves too. And to know that you believe in them. Listening without having their phones, like truly listening. And I know kids can talk a lot and they have some wild stories and they've got a lot to say, but really honing in, especially when they're trying to tell us something and putting down our phone. It's so hard to not be distracted by things. And then a healthy, safe touch. Sometimes a hug is what kids need and that a connection point. And maybe they don't need words right then, but just, touching their shoulder, or, if you have that trust with a child, of course, healthy and safe touch can be a connection point too. Right. Oh, you guys can't see that very well. So now we're going to move on to empowering and teaching. We talked a little bit about how co-regulation is that precursor to regulation on their own. And I think it's really important to teach coping mechanisms because they don't know how to do it on their own. We pick babies up when they cry. They don't know how to self-soothe. I worked in a different country for a while at an orphanage, and I was told not to pick up the infants that were crying, to teach them not to cry. And it was heartbreaking because they do learn that. They do, after 30 days, stop crying because they're learning no one is coming to soothe me. But what we're teaching when we do teach them, we do pick them up, we do soothe them is, I'm here, you can trust me, right? So every time you help co-regulate with your child, you're teaching them that regulation piece, you're teaching them that trust piece. And that's so important. And it's important to model that we're frustrated too. And I think that is something that's overlooked a lot of times when we're thinking about like gentle parenting and things that comes across as, oh, take some 3 deep breaths. I have had some rough sessions today. I've had some great sessions, but I've had some kids with lots of big feelings today. And sometimes I have to say, I'm feeling really mad right now. I think I'm going to take some 5 deep breaths. Do you want to take them with me? Cool. Because sometimes it's okay for them to see, or like somebody cuts you off in traffic. It's okay to show them, I'm so mad. I can feel my heart beating. I can feel my fists really tight right now. And it's okay to show them that you're frustrated. And then you're also showing them how you're working through that. Like, oh, I'm so mad. I'm going to take some deep breaths. I need a minute, and that's okay because you're teaching them, because everyone has feelings. But if we don't ever show them what it looks like when we're mad and how we calm down, they don't know how to work through that. So it's good to show them, yeah, adults get mad too. That's totally normal. And to label their emotions, because a lot of times maybe we're right in between our prefrontal cortex and our midbrain, and we're starting to get really frustrated, or we're just not old enough yet. They might be experiencing emotions that they don't quite have names for yet. And validating those emotions makes all the difference. They're trying to put these 2 Legos together and cannot get it. Oh man, that looks really frustrating. You feel frustrated right now. And they're like, yeah, I am frustrated. Yeah, thanks. Sometimes we just want people to acknowledge how we're feeling, and that makes a lot of difference. And then once they are calm, it's important to teach those coping mechanisms and the coping skills. We aren't able to teach our coping skills when we're in our midbrain, right? We're not in a learning place. We're in a stress response. So we have to teach the coping skills when we're calm. We're creating those neural pathways in our brain. So our brain knows, okay, when I start to get mad, then I can take my deep breaths, because we've been practicing these really deep breaths all the time when I'm calm. So then we can implement it. It just becomes a habit almost. But we can't teach the skills when we're already mad. So I'm teaching them when we're calm. There's some things here that we can talk about later, but you guys can read them. But just ideas for littles and bigger kids for learning some coping skills. There's some great apps and different therapy things. Next thing for empowerment is paying attention to our body, paying attention to their body, pay attention to our body. It's important. That hunger, anger is very real. As a kiddo that had no idea what was going on inside their body as a kid, I have distinct and very strong memories of shopping with my mother. First of all, you could never find jeans because I was always so tall and so thin, so they never worked. And we were hours walking around Von Mar and Ellis Ayres and all the places that don't even exist anymore, and being so tired and so hungry, but I didn't realize until those feelings were so big that it was just a meltdown in the middle of the floor, right? So kiddos that aren't super aware of their external body awareness, we're bumping into things, we trip over stuff a lot, probably aren't super aware of their internal body awareness. So the feeling of being hungry and tired or mad or full don't get registered until they're at a really big state. So, and your OTs can help you with that. If you have kiddos that are like, oh yeah, they probably don't know what's going on. Occupational therapists can help a lot with that. And then validating through words. We talked a little bit about this, but mirroring those emotions. You're really feeling frustrated right now, and the tone of which we validate matters. If I walked into work and I was trying to tell Kara about how this person cut me off on work, she's like, oh wow, that feels really frustrating. I would say, I want to hit you right now. But if you're like, that sucks, like I'm sorry somebody cut you off, like it hits different, right? And our kids pick up on that too, if we are belittling to them, because even though it might not be a big deal to us that their toy broke, it's a big deal to them. Yeah, I'm so bummed your toy broke. That stinks. I wonder what we can work together to fix it. And then routines and timers. Having structure helps kids. They thrive on having some structure and some balance. And it doesn't have to be a super strict routine, especially our kiddos that struggle on like, okay, on weekends, everything just goes, we do really well during the week when we have school, but on the weekends when there's no structure, it's just chaos. So even having a simple schedule of like, we use a lot of visual schedules here. So we have pictures, but of just like, we're gonna have breakfast and then we have free time and then it's lunchtime and then it's play outside, right? So it doesn't have to be every single thing, but if we have some structure, that can really help. And then also if we know that there's going to be a change to our routine, letting them know in advance, right? If I expected something and I really like my routine and then somebody automatically just changes it out of the blue, that can be a really big issue. So if we know in advance, normally we play outside after lunch today, but we have to run an errand with mom to the postal service. We're going to do that, and letting them know beforehand can be helpful. And then a sense of time is super hard for kids too. Knowing like 5 more minutes is, what does that even mean when you're little? So I love this visual timer. Amazon has them, but it's red and then it gets smaller. The red goes away. So it's an actual visual thing that you can set for kids and say 10 more minutes, here it is, and they can watch the time go down. iPads, Alexa's great. Alexa can help with morning routine. You can set up a morning routine with her and she'll tell your kids what to do next. And then being specific. A lot of times we get stuck in what not to do, but we struggle with telling kids what to do. Stop hitting your sister. Stop hitting your sister right now. Stop hitting your sister right now or you're going in timeout. But we haven't told them what to do. Hit a little close to home. Gotcha. So we get stuck on the stop and the kids just hear hitting instead of, it's not okay to hit your sister. You can play over here with your Legos, or you can go read a book. Here are your choices, right? So if we give them what we want them to do rather than what we don't want them to do, that can be game changing. So yeah, specific things of what we can do. That's a hard one to remember sometimes. All right, and then more on that empowerment. How does your child learn best? Are they a visual learner? Are they an auditory learner? How do you learn best? And thinking about what ways that we're telling them, because if we're just telling them in words and they don't learn in words, that can be really hard. Maybe we need pictures. Maybe we need to show them what we want them to do instead. And also physically getting on their level too. A lot of times if I yell at a kid across and like, hey buddy, come on, we're going to the horse. And they're like playing with something they love, I could keep yelling louder. But a lot of times I go over. my tray again a little bit closer so they can see me. And then I'm down on their level, right? So I'm gonna get down on their eye level, buddy. Hey, it's time for horse. So physically getting on their level, because a lot of times if we're really engaged in something, you know, we're really engaged in something. Oh, back to that time thing. Time flies, right? If we're like playing a video game or something we love, it's gone 10 minutes, it's gone in a second. And that can be really alarming for a kid when you say, all right, 10 more minutes of iPad, and then they're like so into it. And then you're like, okay, we're done, iPad's gone. They're like, what? They just rocked their world because they didn't get the concept of what that 10 minutes looked like. So yes. And then yeah, tell, show, do is another method that I really like. I might tell them we're not doing it, then I'm going to show them, and then I'm going to help them do it. So tell, show, do can be really helpful. And then choice versus commands. Like we mentioned earlier, kids get a lot of commands throughout the day. We're told what to do, and our capacity to receive those commands has a limit. And I think it's hard for kids. It's hard being a kid. I don't want to go back to being a kid and being told what to do all the day, every day. But if I got some choices, that could help. And I also think it's important for parents to prioritize what commands we want to make sure that we have. So think about maybe then tomorrow, think about how many commands you give every day. And then, oh, wow, that's kind of a lot of commands. And then think about which ones are like, okay, you got to have these ones. And then choices, right? So it's not a choice for my kid not to wear a helmet on the horse when we have horse out here, but it can be a choice if they want the red helmet or the blue helmet. So they get a little bit of empowerment and collaboration in that. I also do a lot of observing, and that helps decrease the amount of commands that I have to give a kid. So I might say, I see a jacket on the floor. It doesn't look like we're ready for school yet. I wonder what we need. So I'm just observing what's happening, and they'll be like, oh, I don't have my backpack, or I'm wearing my shoes. So that can be helpful, just observing or wondering, I wonder what we need next to leave. And that's also putting it in their court to develop that executive functioning. So we want them to be autonomous. We want our kids to be able to figure out how to get ready for school without us having to tell them every single step, right? So if I wonder, I wonder what we need next. What do you think? You're putting it back in their court to start doing some of those things on their own, which is a great skill. And then collaboration and compromise. I had a kiddo arrive to my session incredibly dysregulated. He was bouncing. We were all around this waiting room, moving. And the child had been working really hard on getting ready to use reins on the horse, which is a higher level skill that I need a child to be very regulated for if they're going to start to have some control over the horse. So what I am observing, this child is not ready to ride with reins today. This is not a safe thing. So I'm processing through this on my dysregulated child. We don't have time to do a lot of calm down things in between. So we get ready for a horse and we're walking out there, and he's like, remembers that it's reins day. And I'm like, oh yeah, I was hoping you would forget. Does not forget. So I pull him aside and I'm like, hey buddy, our body is not ready for reins today. And I can see him on that borderline of a meltdown. He just like stops. And I'm like, what am I going to do right now? Because I know that, and this is a child that has had very physical, violent meltdowns in the past. He's about as big as I am. So we got 3 big horses out there too. So that was like, whew, what are we gonna do? So I was like, would you like a compromise? And he's like, yes. It's like, okay, if we can do 3 laps, with a calm body, I think everything's okay. So our compromise was 3 laps with a calm body, and then we'll try reins, right? So the goal wasn't just that he wouldn't ride with reins. The goal was a regulated child. That's what I wanted, regulated, safe child. So I offered him a compromise of let's do 3 laps without reins. And if you can still have a calm body, let's try reins. And he was like, okay, all right. So I gave him a little bit of empowerment by offering a compromise that worked and trying to think that big goal was our safety and regulation. So offering compromises can be helpful. Adding collaboration. What is that child motivated by? How can we work together for a solution? You're really frustrated about this. I'm really frustrated about this. What's our big goal and how can we work together? All right, sensory and cups. This is going to be a whole in-service all on its own by Kaylin Schreiber, who's our autism specialist. So I'm going to give you like a teaser and hopefully you'll come back for more. But so sensory systems, we have our touch, taste, sight, smell, sound, proprioception, vestibular, and interoception, which are some lesser known sensory systems. But I like to think of each of those senses in our bodies as different size cups. So some people have really big cups and some people have really small cups, and it depends on the sensory system itself. The goal is that we want to fill up the cups without having the cups overflowing. So if a kiddo had a really big cup for sound, they may love loud music and thrive being in a really loud place. Kid had a really small cup for sound, they would have earmuffs on and they would be hiding on their table away from lots of sound, right? So because we have different sensory cups and different sizes, everybody's sensory system looks a little bit different and our needs look a little bit different. And that can impact our ability to follow directions and respond well and regulate. So that's something to think of too, right? If our child's having a big meltdown, we need to think about our sensory system too. Are those cups overflowing or are they completely empty? How do we fill them? How do we make sure, they're full but not overflowing? What things can we modify? So if you have a kiddo that has a lot of sensory things going on, Kaylin is a great person to talk about and she'll be doing a whole in-service on this later. Our interoception is our internal body awareness, and that's,
Might sound like a stupid question. Is
No.
there any type of assessment to evaluate like what the sensory size cups your child might have? Like
Yeah.
hearing?
Yeah.
Because we think that our son has hearing, but we don't know about taste or smell or anything else. Is there any type of evaluation that you can do?
Yes. So we have the sensory profile and the sensory processing measure. And both of those would be, especially a combination of both of those would be great to, they're just, you fill out like what you've observed of your child, you know him best, right? So you've seen how we respond in those different things. And that would be a good assessment to identify a little bit more about his cups and
Okay, thank
sizes.
you.
Yeah, for sure. So the interoception is that internal body awareness, right? So if we don't have that external body awareness, we probably don't have that internal body awareness. So so our kiddos, we're not recognizing those feelings, then we have a giant meltdown because I didn't know I was mad until I was furious. I didn't know I was hungry until I was so starving. I didn't know I was tired until I was exhausted. So a lot of times kiddos that lack that external body awareness, lack the internal body awareness. So we have a lot of meltdowns because we're just not registering what's going on inside our body. And that's common for lots of little kids. You know, it's a skill that we get better at over time. But if you're like, okay, yeah, this seems more than normal, then OT might be a really good option because that's something that we can work on here. We usually start with a lot of external physical things like, let's touch things on our hand. What does that feel like? Let's touch things on our feet and describing and putting names to those sensations. And then we can work more towards our internal sensation. So it's a whole thing. It's pretty cool. But yeah, interoception is a thing and can contribute to those feelings. All right, so we are working our way up the tier, right? So we had a lot of that connection stuff. Then we had our empowerment stuff. Now we're going to move on to our correction things. And remember that correction, we're really struggling there and things aren't working, go back down, go back to the empowerment and the connection part. So they're super, super important. The goal is correction is inevitable. Every person, every human needs correction and direction because no one's perfect. But we want to use the least amount of force to get that child back on track. So like, what's the least amount of escalation that I can do? Because if I can use something minimal, then I'm going to start with that and we can keep going. I don't want to elevate it to a full timeout and we have to stop the game and everyone's mad. So we're going to talk about different levels of things that we can use. My first one that's like the least invasive is playful engagement. I love playful engagement. It is so fun and it is the hands down most overlooked tool with adults because we are in our adult brain and we stop playing but kids aren't, especially if you have a kiddo like under 7. Playful engagement, it's so great. So I have a kiddo does not want to put shoes on. We have to wear shoes to ride the horse. But they're like, no. And my first thought is like, okay, first shoes, then horse, right? We often go to that first, then. Not working. They are not putting their shoes on. So then I take their shoes and I was like, I'm hungry. I want to eat some feet. And you know what? That could stuck their foot in the shoe and they're like, "Rum, rum, 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 rum." We got those shoes on and we were on the horse in like no time. Because I went rather from being my like structure, first this, then that, to like, okay, let's make it playful. And it was the least invasive approach, right? But the child loved it. And now we eat her feet every time. But yeah, so playful engagement, I feel like is something that's like, oh yeah, we can still play. That's a great and easy thing to use. Also notice your own brain state and your own regulation. A lot of times we ourselves are getting elevated and it can turn really quickly from like a child refusing something to a power struggle. And we're dysregulated and they're dysregulated. And oh man, everyone is so frustrated. So noticing what's going on in our bodies too. Have I been drinking enough water today? No, the answer is no. Are you eating? Are you taking time to do that own deep breathing? And whatever fills your cup up too is important. And if you need to take a step back, you need to take a step back. It's okay to say, Mom is really frustrated right now. I'm going to walk in that other room and take 5 deep breaths. I'm going to come back in. If your child is safe and in a safe space, like that's okay. Yes. And talking about power struggles, I would say as a new practitioner, when I first started, this was my hardest thing, because if a child would refuse to do, oh man, no, I'm going to get them to do what I told them to do. And it ended up being this thing. And it wasn't even about the activity that we were doing anymore. It was my own ego of like, they're going to do it. They're going to do this thing that I want them to do. And I had to take a step back and look at why do I want them to do this thing? Is it because I want to be right and I want to force them to know that I'm in charge? Or is it truly, this is a safety thing, or this is about the thing that being really important? So a lot of times going back, okay, what is the goal? Is the goal that we're going to safely get into the car and put on our seatbelt? Okay, does it matter that they have a doll with them? No. Okay, cool. You can take the doll with you. So sometimes it's like, what is our power struggle? Why is our power struggle? So taking yourself just a step back, what is this situation truly about? Can be very helpful. And then our consequences need to make sense. Our kids get really confused if our consequences don't match up with what happened, right? So we spilled some orange juice. I told you to be very careful with that orange juice glass, and you spilled the orange juice. You do not get any time with the iPad. What? What does my orange juice have to do with my iPad? I'm so confused. But you spilled your orange juice. Oh no. Oh, looks like we need to clean up that orange juice. So then they have to help you clean up the orange juice. So having a consequence of like, you spilled this, we need to fix it. You help me clean it up together. Rather than taking away a really highly preferred item, even though I know it's hard. It's like, oh yeah, they like it, I'm just taking it away. Not saying that isn't always appropriate, but if it doesn't match up with what is going on, then it could be very confusing for a kid and not actually helpful. So making a consequence that does go with what's going on in the long run makes more sense. And then fear-based punishment is not effective in the long term. Research has been showing if we're hitting, although it may be immediately effective because we're instilling this fear-based compliance, in the long run health of the child, mental health, it's causing more mental health problems, chronic stress. When we go back to that cortisol loop of that child flooding, this can actually cause our child to stay and cause more of a traumatic response than what we want. So that has some long-term impacts. Okay, so some tools to try. Setting those expectations preemptively. A lot of those meltdowns occur when a kid feels blindsided, and sometimes it's not able to prevent a change, an unexpected change that is going to occur. And like, we're going to the store today, but there are so many things that I think you might like there. You can choose one treat when we get to the store. So letting them know before we get to the store, you're gonna pick one thing out. Isn't that gonna be so cool? You can make any one treat that you want, rather than like, I want the Twinkies, I want the Reese's, I want this, I want this, I want this. And then we tell them, oh, you can only have one. We might have a meltdown then, right? So if I'm setting them up beforehand and telling them those expectations, that can really help. Our body language. Most of our communication is nonverbal with kids and with everyone really. And having an open body posture versus a closed body posture can make a really big difference when we're correcting a child. So I always try to keep my palms open, which sounds kind of weird because like who stands like this? But especially when I notice that I'm feeling frustrated or I know there's going to be a correction that needs to happen, I immediately try to keep my palms open, and it always helps me start to take deep breaths and like just be like, okay, I'm very aware of my body, very aware of how I'm communicating to this child, which feels odd, but it definitely helps me. So changing your posture, getting down on their level, so it's not like just standing over them. We are the ones in charge, can be very helpful to de-escalate that situation. And then be an observer, especially we talked a little bit about this with commands, rather than always having them telling them what to do this, do this, do this. You can say, I see that jacket's on the floor. A jacket. And then they, that might prompt them of like, we're using less words and you don't have to tell them, pick the jacket up off the floor. We're taking some of that directive away. It can be less frustrating for a kid. And you can even say one word, and it's easier to be less, I don't know how to say this. My tone, I can be frustrated and mad and say one word and it's less hurtful for a child. I need somebody to pick this jacket up off the ground or I'm going to lose it, versus jacket. If we've said 5 times about the jacket and we could just say one word, I can still be frustrated and it's not going to be as harmful or hurtful for a kiddo. Redos. I love redos. They're great. They're really hard to do when you're in a rush and daily life. I get that it's tricky, but when we talked about that prefrontal cortex not being mature until we're like 25 or 30 for guys is what I've heard, but redos can be really, really helpful. So a lot of times we're not thinking. So if a child walks through and they take a toy from somebody, that's rude, go to timeout. That's one option. So we've stopped the game, we've escalated that. I can observe it. Oh, Johnny, you took the toy from your sister. Let's try that again with respect. Rewind. We could do some playful engagement. Add a little sound in there. Toy goes back into sister's hand. Let's try that again with respect. Can I have the toy? Oh, sorry, I'm still playing with it. Oh, it's not your turn yet. You can wait. So he makes a different choice. He asked. It's not his turn yet. We can redirect him to something else. So they're not always going to choose the right choice when we do a redo. And then we may have to move to a different correction, right? But a lot of times, if we're just doing something without thinking, like walking by and I'm just going to knock that off because I want to see what happens. I don't know. Sometimes kids just do things and they're like, I want to see what happens when this happens. And I'm like, oh, let's try that again with respect. Then they're going to be like, oh yeah, it fell on the ground. And yeah, so they try it again. So redos are great because what doesn't happen is you're not elevating that situation. You're giving them a second chance before you're like, okay, go to timeout, and everything stops and everyone gets mad and now everyone's crying and you're frustrated and dinner's still late and blah, 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 right? And then time-ins are really helpful too. So when we talked a lot about that co-regulation before regulation. So when we send a kid away and they're already dysregulated, a lot of times, your kid best, but a lot of times that can make us even more upset. So some kids, they need that time by themselves to calm down and they're good with that. Other kids can become more stressed when now I'm by myself and I'm thinking all these things and I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to calm my body down, versus you're really upset right now. I'm going to sit next to you and we can deep breathe together until you feel better. And, maybe they want you can just put an arm around them, or you can do a squeeze, or you just sit next to them on that step and not very many words. And we're just there together. And then we can talk about things when we're all back calmed down. But I call that more of a time in rather than a time out. So you're staying with them and they know like, yeah, I did a thing that was bad, but like mommy still loves me. Like she's still beside me, which can be really helpful, especially for kids that have previous adverse childhood experiences. And then problem solving. So this is more for your like later elementary school kids and on up. Problem solving can be a really great thing to develop that executive functioning skills. So you get a physical list. So maybe you both want this toy, right? You want this toy, sister wants a toy, brother wants this toy. We've got a problem. What do we do? Well, I'm gonna get some paper. let's write down every toy, write down every idea that we have. So maybe you write down, even if it's a silly idea, even if it's ridiculous and it will never work, you want to cut the toy in half. Okay, cut the toy in half. All right, what's your idea? Okay, you get the toy first, and then 5 minutes later, she gets the toy. Okay, cool. What about you guys both play with a different toy? Cool. And then after you have a list, then you go through the list together, cut the toy in half. What do we think? Everybody, nope, not gonna work. Okay, cross that one off. All right, you have the toy for 5 minutes, and you have the toy for 5 minutes. You don't want to do that either. Okay, nope. All right, you both play with a different toy. You guys are good with that? Cool. And if we can't decide on something, then we need more ideas. And if we try something and it doesn't work, we both choosing to choose something different. Okay. Well, now they're mad about that again. It looks like we need more ideas. So the nice thing about it is, like, if the solution they picked doesn't work, oh, we need more ideas. And you just go back and you try some more. So it's really good for those older kids and helping them problem solve on your own, because you're not solving it for them. You're just kind of refereeing the situation more so. You guys are doing great. If you need to move around, feel free to move. I know it's been a good 40 minutes, so you're doing awesome. We are pretty close to being done. So correction. So when there's an explosion, when we have those really, really big feelings, I'm going to move here.
Thank you.
There we
Sorry.
go.
I'm trying to hear other stuff. So.
That's okay. We want to remember those brain states. So remember, that prefrontal cortex. If we are, still talking, still engaging and learning and playing, we're good. But if we're having a big meltdown, we're probably in that midbrain. So remember, we're having a stress response. We're having that cortisol going through our body. For them, it's like a big deal, even if that's not a big deal to us. They don't have access to words. So using less words when they are melting down is better. Now, we can't explain the whole situation or talk about the why yet. Right now, I'm going to use as few words as possible to help them get back to that regulated state. And then we're going to co-regulate. We're going to make sure they're safe and the situation is safe. And we're going to model a lot of breathing. So a lot of that deep breathing is one of the fastest ways to turn that brain back online. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I love hot chocolate breathing. We do a lot of hot chocolate breathing where you hold your hot chocolate. First, you got to smell it. Oh, it's too hot. You got to pull it off. Is it safe enough to drink? Too hot, too hot. And you can keep doing it until it's better. So it's just like a fun, any deep breathing activities, there's tons of them online, can be a great thing to teach before we're upset, and then fun to implement, or easier to implement when we are stressed. And then once we are regulated, we're going to reconnect and discuss when our prefrontal cortex is back on. So we're going to talk about, what happened and why, things we might change differently, but we're always going to validate that they're a good kid. I always avoid saying good boy, good girl, or bad boy, bad girl, because they're always a good kid, even if we don't make good choices, right? So no matter what, that was not a great choice. We're going to make a different choice next time. But I always try to validate that, because kids need to know that they're precious and they're loved after a meltdown. They don't feel great either, and they're still having that stress going through their body. So that connection is a really important thing. So a couple examples. If we're having really big anger, I'm going to think about that brain state and identify, oh man, you sound super annoyed with your sister. So I'm validating, I'm using that tone that, they're so mad. I get that. I'm not going to dismiss their feelings of it's no big deal. She took your toy yesterday. You took, it's fine. So I'm going to try to avoid dismissing those feelings. And then I'm going to model that deep regulation, or that deep breathing, that regulation. I might give choices yeah, you can do this, or you can do this. I might help them problem solve, and I'm going to give them time if they need that. So if we're being sassy, I have some friends that are a little bit sassy, so I might say, I think that came out wrong. You want to try that again with respect? Let's try that again. I'm like, oh, I need to put those words back in your mouth. I think they came out wrong. So sometimes if we're just, oh yeah, that was a little rude, and they might try that again. Or I might set boundaries of it's not okay to do this. You can do this or this. And then I might think back of, is there a physical or emotional need that isn't met? Or going back down that tier. Have I not had time to connect with them? Are we being a little sassy and a little frustrated because we haven't had much one-on-one time lately? Things have been really busy. There's been a lot of meetings. Do we need to do some more of that empowerment or connection piece? And then fighting siblings. If it's physical, of course, we're going to separate, right? Our goal is always safety. So I'm going to separate you. I can't let anyone help. I can't let anyone get hurt. You to the couch, you to the stairs, and then reflect both feelings. Yeah, you didn't really like it when she took your stuff. Yeah, you wanted the stuff. I get that. And then avoid taking sides. We're going to help them problem solve, brainstorm ideas. You can, and then if they can't problem solve, you might have to assist in that too, depending on, our age. So these are some of my favorite resources. They are awesome books. All of this is going to be online too. Yes.
Sorry, yes. In the previous example,
Yes.
what if your children are too young to problem solve?
Too young to problem solve.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you could help them. Oh, do you think we should, do you think, how old are they?
They're almost 2.
Almost 2. So they're pretty little. Yeah. You might have to be like, oh, yep, daddy's going to take the toy away for now. It seems like we can both play with something else right now. Because it seems like we can't play. We're not able to take turns and share with this. Or you might try the timer. The visual timer can be really helpful or the sand timers too. They come in different time increments can be helpful. Like, oh, I'm setting the timer. Is that something you've tried yet?
We've done the timer.
Yeah, but not
Helpful,
a visual one really.
Okay.
Just on the phone.
On the phone.
Yeah.
And that can be hard because then you don't really know, this thing's gonna buzz. Yeah, but a visual timer might be helpful. And then have you tried man, looks like we can't share right now. This toy's gonna go away for now. And then when we feel calm. Yeah. Morbid feelings.
I'm usually the one that puts it away.
Yeah. Yes. And 2. Yes. Those. Yeah.
Yeah,
2
so
and less.
brother's 3.5, and he's the one that usually,
He's the instigator.
yeah, and he gets put in the break time. But with the time in, then sister feels like, oh, he's getting the attention, even though he
Yeah.
started it. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm struggling with.
With how to validate. Yes, I want you to be regulated,
Yeah.
but now I don't want you to act up just so you can have a
Right.
special time with mom too.
Right.
Are you able to do the one-on-one, the 10 minutes of just time with mom?
We've just started doing that
Okay.
actually this past week. So I think we've seen some positive. He really loves it, and we do for both of them. But 20 minutes later, he can have a meltdown about something, it's great when we're doing it, and that, hopefully as we continue to do it, we'll see positive
Longer
changes throughout the
effects
day.
over the day. Yeah, that's really hard. Because you want to model that you don't just get attention when you're melting down. You get the one-on-one attention every day, no
Right.
matter what. And that will be good for your daughter too. Right?
Yes.
The younger.
Mhm.
Yeah, that'll be helpful. But that is hard in the moment, especially when there's only one of you and you're outnumbered at the moment. Is there anything else that you have tried that has or hasn't worked?
With the fighting siblings.
Well.
We tried a swing for Jacob.
We got him a
for
little
his
swing.
sensory
Mm,
purposes,
sensory
like a
input.
swinging camping chair.
Mhm.
However, we did that in timeout in his room, so that might have canceled it out. So
Yeah,
we
what are your
went
thoughts
back
on
down.
that, putting him in his room to.
I
Wow.
think that sensory is sensory. It shouldn't be a punishment or a reward.
Yeah.
It should always be available. I'm against only rewarding, you can't have the swing until you do these things. But so I think you should be able to have it anytime your body needs it. But if you're dysregulated, that sensory piece is a calming thing too. So I think that's good to have when he is dysregulated. I have some kiddos that love having to sit and spin too, because they'll just spin on the floor in the living room or whatever. But I think having that sensory piece can be really helpful. So does he only get it when he's upset, or does he have access to it other
He
times?
could go up to his room anytime, but he doesn't. So
Okay.
right now it's we put him in his room kind of as a punishment. And so I think we need to remedy that.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe if you're noticing him getting ramped up. Oh, I noticed you're frustrated. I noticed you're having some of those big feelings, kind of doing some more of that modeling for him, because maybe he's not really aware of what those feelings are getting. And would you like to swing right now? Do you need some squeezes? I do a lot of row where you're grabbing
Yeah.
kid's hand and pulling back and forth.
That's a good idea.
And might be something to try.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And then, yes, so this whole presentation will be up on our website, so you can come back to all of this stuff. These are some of my favorite books. And then Easter Seals Crossroads it's at 52nd and Keystone. It's an organization for people with disabilities, and they have an incredible respite program. One of my big things is we can't pour out if we're empty. And I think it's so hard for parents sometimes, right? Because we're giving, and sometimes there's nothing left for me to give. But this is a respite program for any kid with a disability. They're typically developing siblings can come too. It's a free program. All of the staff, I helped run the program for about 10 years, so I can vouch that all the staff are really highly trained, and I wouldn't advocate for kids to go there if it wasn't safe, but you can go once a month, and it's 4 hours where your kids can be in a safe environment with snacks and other kids. And so you're 6 months to 12 years, and then there's a teenage program too as well, but the 6 months to 12 typically developing siblings can go, as well as the child with a disability. So, and every other month you get a parent care package, which is like a gift card to go out to eat or movies or something. So you should check that out. It's on their website, Easter Seals Crossroads. So if you are looking for just a little bit of a respite or a break, that is a good resource to go to. Okay, so our next steps, we just have a couple minutes left, and I would like you guys to pair and share. So some of you guys are, you can pair together already, and Kara doesn't have a partner too, so if you want to pair with Kara, you can. I'm going to pass everyone out little take-home sheets, and Jackie, for the people online, think about, you can, it's hard for you guys to pair and share, but she will have this sheet for you guys and share it on the Zoom, but it's kind of just some of the big takeaways, and then you can write down 2 action steps. So 2 things that you want to try with your kiddos at home, and then we will come back in 2 minutes. So feel free to chat. Some elevator music. There's a clipboard too. Not necessarily. Do you need a pen? Yeah. Okay.
It's not, can't get it, like, I couldn't. Try. I have it also saved on the desktop. We need to look for it.
Okay. So my son is two things that you can. My daughter, who actually seeing, she's 4. But he can do everything. She can do.
I know. There.
And
Yes.
so they are always just.
Let's go to, yeah, your computer. I just saved it to the desktop. Good job, Katie.
So fighting comes a lot. They have different needs.
I didn't rename it. It's just called whatever you called it.
And like sensory things like
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
There it is. Oh, that's a presentation.
Like
It's a whole presentation. Do you want that or do you want that? No, I'm looking for that.
So yeah, it's crazy.
Pair and share. I'll
So
let
yeah,
you
just
know.
getting through like, okay, so this one's for Caleb, this for Kaya, and yeah, I've never myself.
Yeah, we can try again. It's just on the email.
So yeah, like it's cool.
Oh, that's not it.
Yeah, I do it all.
I have it pulled up. I have too many things pulled up. Here it is.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So what action steps?
Take
do you
home
like,
sheet.
What
Okay.
strategies did she tell you about, like really stuck out that you like? tried or looked at?
So there are things that I've kind of tried most of this, but I'm not super consistent. 'Cause,
And
you
then
know,
where did we do that? Right here.
But I have more recently, talking about my feelings. And so that's really helpful.
Just take home sheet.
So I'm like, I hear him repeating things. I started off.
All right. I know this probably wasn't totally enough time to talk about through all your things, but hopefully you're able to get a couple things written down maybe some action steps for yourself. Anybody have any specific questions? And I'll let, if anyone on Zoom has questions too, I'll try to look at that as well. Situations, we got to hit a couple earlier, which was great. People might be doing.
I just have a question. How long should you try a strategy before you're like, this just is not for my child? Because I think sometimes we give up really easy, but sometimes it's just never gonna work.
That's true. And
Yeah.
sometimes kids, you might try a strategy and it doesn't work now. And like maybe when we get to a next developmental stage, or it might work then, right? You know, problem solving for 2-year-olds, not going to work yet, but maybe later, yes. Or playful engagement in certain situations. Sometimes your kid is not buying it, but sometimes they're totally into it. So it might depend on, you know, our physical needs and some of those other things too. How are we doing sensory system wise? Are we hungry? Are we tired? And you may try them intermittently throughout different things. And if it hasn't worked on any of those situations, when we are feeling pretty good and we're not super hungry or tired, then okay, maybe this isn't for us. Let's go back and get some other things. Okay.
Going back to your sibling question, this is just parent to parent. I have no expertise in any of this.
She does.
But Siblings Without Rivalry was a life-changing book in my house.
We need that. Yeah.
And the book
Love
gave,
rivalry.
yeah, Siblings Without Rivalry, and it gave great examples even for like really little kids.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jackie mentioned doing a lot less of like when you want to explain that?
Yeah, one of the things I was telling Katie that I learned from that book is like when my kids would be like, I'd say, oh, I love you. And they'd be like, yeah, I know you love me. You love Ezra, your other kid too. And I used to be like, yeah, I love you both. Now I don't. I'm like, nope, I'm talking about you. We're just talking about you right now. Because I thought, oh, I was building their relationships by reminding them like, I do love everyone. But now I'm like, nope,
We're
I'm
just
not
focusing
just
on
talking about you.
and it kind of comes back to that connection piece, right?
Yeah.
Like if just you time is so
Yeah.
important, and know like, yes, this is just you
Yes.
time.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys all for coming. I really appreciate it. You spending your time. Sorry, we went a little over. So yeah. 5 young people. Thank you guys for coming.
What was that sensory,
Profile.
yeah.
Sensory profile and the sensory processing.